All right. Let's get to it. Let's get to it, folks. Let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard today's edition of Poso Nation. So, for anyone who's watching today, you understand that I've been doing a series of videos this week all about explaining the context of East Asia, China, Taiwan, North Korea, etc. Yesterday, I did a long video explaining the entire history and the background of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and North Korea vis-a-vis today's situation. And so if you haven't watched that video yet, please go back and watch yesterday's video on that. A couple of shout outs here. Hi, Ashley St. Clair, Ian Miles Chong, Still Gray. What's up, Mod Ricky, Flying Cap? And I see that my mom, Lori Poso, is on. So what's up? Now go back and watch yesterday's video where I explained the deal between Hong Kong and the British and the fact that the British gave Hong Kong back to China in 1997 in hopes that that would help bring China into the world community and in hopes that that would help make China more democratic and more capitalist. We now know that, of course, that didn't really happen. China has become more capitalist in some ways, but at the same time, the Chinese Communist Party has not only maintained control of China, they've gotten more and more powerful, and they've gotten bolder and bolder. So today, in light of the new Hong Kong security law that's coming down from Beijing to Hong Kong, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo issued a statement certifying, what's up, Courtney Holland, that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. Now, if you watched my video yesterday, I predicted that this would happen and that this was essentially inevitable. And I've been talking about this for a long time, the fact that essentially geography, in this case, geography is destiny, and that Hong Kong will eventually reunite with mainland China. Taiwan will also eventually reunite with mainland China. The question is on whose terms, and will Hong Kong be able to maintain its own status as a free city and the rights of the Hong Kong citizens be upheld? Okay, what we are seeing now from Beijing and what Mike Pompeo has now asserted and affirmed is essentially everything that I said yesterday, that Hong Kong is losing their civil rights, their civil liberties. They are losing all of that under this, and that China is reneging on their deal. And go back and watch yesterday's video again, because this is exactly what I explained, completely what I explained would happen, and that this was the path that we've been on for 20 plus years now, for a very long time. 23 years since the turnover of Hong Kong, right? Whereas the British had made a deal with China, I should say, over Hong Kong, to maintain Hong Kong's freedoms for 50 years. Well, here it's been 23 years, and China has already reneged on their deal. Because, of course, as we heard before, Donald Trump, don't trust China. China is, you know what to say. So why is China doing this? Why now? And I promised you yesterday that I would explain why China is doing this now and why the Chinese Communist Party is doing that now. And I promised you I would say that today. And I'm a man of my word, and I keep my promises. That's why I'm reminding you of that. There's two reasons. The first reason is internal consumption. The second reason is external consumption. We've got domestic issues and we've got international issues. So you have to look at it from the perspective of Xi Jinping. Imagine you yourself are the chairman leader of the Politburo, the Standing Committee of the Politburo, the leaders of Communist China. Your number one threat is always the collapse of your regime collapse. That's always your number one threat. Every Chinese dynasty has collapsed from the inside. If you go back and watch the very first episode of War Room Pandemic, who was the very first guest on War Room Pandemic, Steve Bannon's podcast with Raheem Kassam, Jason Miller? It was me. They brought me on to talk about my expertise with Hong Kong and my expertise with China. And the thing that I broke down on that day was the mandate of heaven. Okay, and to understand Chinese regime dynamics and the theory of dynastic cycles in Chinese history, you have to understand what exactly the mandate of heaven means. So the mandate of heaven, and this isn't like a spiritual thing in a sense of God or sort of a Western conception of heaven, but what it means is that you have this regime has the legitimacy to rule, and the legitimacy to rule over all of China, or Tianxia, so the land under the heaven, right? So the world, the entire world, Tianxia, the land under the world, the land under the sky. And so that's what they refer to it, the land under the sky. So the land under the sky is everything. That's Mandarin. And so what every dynastic cycle through China essentially works out like this. The new dynasty is established. That dynasty reaches prosperity. The dynasty becomes corrupt. The dynasty declines. Then the dynasty collapses and is replaced as a new dynasty takes over. And one of the key indicators of a dynasty in decline throughout Chinese history, famine, pestilence, and disease, viral pandemics. This has been seen throughout Chinese history as an indicator of a regime losing the mandate of heaven. That essentially saying that this regime is over, and this regime has lost the mandate of heaven, and that the only way for China as a polity to continue to grow and succeed is to change the regime, get a new regime, get a new one up. So that's why it was such a big deal for the Chinese to admit they had a pandemic on their hands, because they know that to admit that was to threaten their own grip on the country. And that's how I knew very early on to take COVID-19 coronavirus very seriously, because they were taking it to extreme levels. And in 15 years of traveling back and forth from China, learning Mandarin and dealing with them, I've never seen them act like that. I've never seen them admit something like that. And so what you have to understand now is that because they had to admit that pandemic, it's like Chernobyl, right? That's why we call it China's Chernobyl. Because what was Chernobyl? Chernobyl was one of the acts that led to a lack of legitimacy for the Soviet regime in the Soviet Union, and that led the people to push for reform. Eventually, Gorbachev took over the party, and then the Soviet Union collapsed. Right, and so now that the regime had to admit that, they are trying. Now you understand all that context. So if you're the leader of China, what's something that you can do if you're running the CCP to double down and reinforce the idea that your regime does have the mandate of heaven? What could you do potentially to send a message to your own people that you are the legitimate rulers of the Forbidden City, that you are crowned by heaven, that you do have the mandate of heaven, and that it is your destiny to rule all of China? What is something that you could do? I'm going to check the comments real quick to see if you guys have been paying attention. What is something you could do? Drinking water today, regular old Deer Park water. Unite China. Very good. Very good. It was the fourth comment of this. The fourth comment of this, you got it right. Unite China. Reclaim Hong Kong. There you go. Reestablish your rule over all of China. Right? 解放中国. Definitely. Let's read the comment there. So, to bring back your external territories. So, their idea to reestablish their mandate of heaven over the country and over the world, or internally, right? Internally, is to bring the wayward territories of Hong Kong and Taiwan, and of course Xinjiang, what they're doing up there is in a sense similar to this, because they were trying to secede from China, is to bring them back, to reunite China. Because reuniting China is actually very important to a lot of Chinese people. You got to understand that, by the way. So having Taiwan be separated from China, having Hong Kong separated. I mean, imagine if Texas was, had broken off from the United States. Wouldn't all of America want Texas to come back? Wouldn't all of America want Texas to come back? Wouldn't we consider Texas to still be an inseparable part of the United States? Wouldn't we want it to come back? We would. Of course we would. Right? And that's how the typical Chinese person thinks of Taiwan. Hong Kong, think of Hong Kong as like New York City, right? Imagine if New York City had gone under British leadership and been a British city this whole time, even though it's sitting right there and at the mouth of the Hudson, and yet Manhattan Island and the boroughs are all controlled by the British Empire. And then eventually Britain sort of quasi gave it back, but they still had some control over it. And we were like, yay, I'm just trying to put this into a perspective that makes a little bit of sense for Americans. Obviously it's not a one-to-one. And so to understand, right, that's how the typical Chinese person thinks of this stuff. So if you are the leader of the CCP and you want to send a message internally, right, to your domestic audience that you have the mandate of heaven, then being the regime that reunites China after so long. Remember, 1949 is when the split with Taiwan occurred. Hong Kong, of course, has never fully been part of China. The British established it as a colony in 1897. They transferred sovereignty in 1997 under the deal, which is referred to as one country, two systems, although Hong Kong has maintained its system until now. And so that is the reason for flexing this muscle. It also serves a separate purpose of telling the United States and telling the West that you can't touch us, that you can't do anything to us. Because by the way, someone in the comments just completely didn't understand. All right, you're going to get muted because you don't know how to understand how to follow what we're saying. And so I want you to be able to focus on what I'm saying and not spend your time writing comments, because maybe that's helping you misunderstand. Maybe that's not helping you understand. I was making an analogy to explain the Chinese position. I am not saying that is my position. Okay? Do you understand the distinction? Does everybody understand why I was talking about New York and Texas like that? I was not saying that, Texas and New York should secede from America. Okay. Right. And I said, it was very clear that I said, it's not the same thing. I'm just trying to give you a framework on how to think about it. Okay. And I was like, someone's going to Media Matters me over this and say, Jack Posobiec says that Hong Kong is the same as New York City and Texas is the same as Taiwan, and therefore the communist government of Beijing should do whatever they want. And they're all going to get big mad about it. And I'm like, That's literally not what I said. Literally not what I said. It's a framework. I am trying to get you to find a way to understand it, to explain it to you from the perspective of just the average Chinese person, right? Just the average Chinese person, right? It's not one-to-one. No, that's not what you said. I can see what you said, Posobiec. I can see what you said exactly. This is Ellsworth Toohey, by the way. If you've ever read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, this is Ellsworth Toohey. No, Posobiec is all wrong. I've got it here. I've got exactly what it is. Don't watch his full video. Just watch the clip that I clipped. I'm Ellsworth Toohey, and I know exactly what is right. 100%. Yes. The producers are listening to me laughing. No, it's not Cronkite. It's Ellsworth Toohey. Read The Fountainhead. Read The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and you can go ahead and understand who Ellsworth Toohey is. Watch the movie with Gary Cooper. It's a good one. So that's the analogy, right? So the other issue, by the way, that's really big. No, Fountainhead is better than Atlas Shrugged. It's a better story. The other issue that's really big here is that so China, number one, is saying, right, so China, Bridesheads Revisited sucked. What are you talking about? Don't even come into my live stream and talk about Bridesheads Revisited. That movie was awful. It was absolutely terrible. It was a terrible movie. So bad. What was the other one that was really bad? The Atonement. Oh, God. Brideshead Revisited and The Atonement. Just awful. Absolutely awful films. Never, ever watch them. Don't even come close to watch them. No, and I'm trying to get this finished because I want to watch The Launch too. Anyway. Meanwhile, in Cape Canaveral today, SpaceX will launch the first ship. SpaceX claims to be a private university or a private corporation, though they receive billions and billions of dollars from the US government. Elon Musk claims to be a private businessman, yet he receives a gravy train of subsidies from the US government as well. Perhaps we should go back and actually fund NASA and get the space shuttles back, return to our program and the Constellation program that were canceled by Barack Obama. Perhaps we should do that. But no, instead we're going to go with Elon Musk, who may or may not be sober at this moment. All the Muskies are going to be mad at that one. Muskie's going to be mad. What can I do? Got to tell the truth. I love Howard Cosell. So China is sending a message to the United States. China is sending a message to the United States and the West that they don't care about us and that they are a superpower. So they're flexing, right? They're flexing to say that we don't care about making a deal with you because we don't have to respect your deal because we're a superpower now, and a superpower doesn't have to respect your deal. So they're saying it's disrespecting the West, it's disrespecting the United States, and disrespecting the UK by saying that it doesn't matter if we make deals with you, we can renege on them. So that's what China's doing. They're reneging on their deal. So they're reneging on our deal is, kind of like when Barack Obama reneged on Constellation and Barack Obama reneged on his entire space policy and decided to just start throwing money at Elon Musk, who, has a lot of questions about his drug use, to put it mildly. And so the other issue with what China is doing, and this is key, this is absolute key to bring up, and I'm going to break this down possibly more tomorrow, but the fact that China is talking about this new law as an anti-terrorism measure, and the fact that they're using the language of referring to the protesters and the leaders of the protesters as terrorists is a huge deal, because what this is going to do is it's going to open up China and Hong Kong, really. It's going to open up Hong Kong to being allowed to use the Hong Kong Special Duty Unit, the Flying Tigers, against the protesters and the freedom fighters. And folks, who was it that trained the Hong Kong SDU? Who was it that trained the Hong Kong Flying Tigers? This is the Special Forces unit of the Hong Kong Police Force, HKPF. And we know already that the HKPF Special Duty Unit, the SDU, was involved in the protests in 2019, dressing up as protesters, causing disturbances, causing trouble. And yes, so someone's pointing out that is correct. The SDU was originally founded by the British back in the 1970s as a special forces unit, and they received training from SAS, British SAS, of course, being the Special Air Service. They also received training from U.S. Special Forces, to include U.S. Navy SEALs. So please understand this, that there is a unit of Hong Kong's government, of the Hong Kong police, that under this new law may be able to use U.S. Navy SEAL tactics against Hong Kong protesters. And who were the ones who taught them? It was us. It was us. It was us. So folks, when it comes to China and it comes to Hong Kong and it comes to all of this, we have to understand that, and I see someone said in the comments, we created this monster in many ways. It is inseparable. We know that U.S. taxpayer money was going from the NIH that eventually found its way to the Wuhan lab. All right, that is just true. That's just a true statement. We know that happened. And so the fact that they're pushing this new law, this new crackdown under the terrorist definition is incredibly significant, And that is why, folks, that we need to be very careful, because we've outsourced U.S. military and British military soft tactics, SOF, S-O-F, Special Operations Forces, to Hong Kong. And this is the path that they're going to use. And yeah, I think that's about it that I have for now. I wanted to keep this short. Yeah, not only did we militarize their police, we're talking about, the militarization of police a lot here in the United States, but we militarized the Hong Kong police and brought them into special forces. And essentially, even though this is referred to as a law, what it actually means is they are losing the rule of law. And that is what Secretary Pompeo and the new Department of State edict and certification meant today, is that the rule of law as pertains to Hong Kong currently doesn't apply. So go enjoy the space launch. Please share this video out for people who want to understand Hong Kong, and I will see you later. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, you have my permission to lay ashore.